and welcome to Rooted in Faith, a podcast of the Adventist Educators blog, where we explore how faith, research, teaching come together to inspire meaningful learning. I'm your host, Suellen Timm, and today's topic is an important and very real topic: teacher burnout. Joining me is Dr. Dave Elias. He has finished his PhD in education and research about burnout among Adventist teachers. Through his work, he is helping us understand how we can care for ourselves as educators while staying rooted in our calling to serve. He is also the K 12 school principal in Canada and an adjunct professor at Andrews University. Dr. Elias, thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And as I mentioned, it's absolutely wonderful that we have an Adventist Education podcast where we have the opportunity to share ideas and things that have been happening. So thank you so much for doing this.
Wonderful. So, you just finished your PhD a few days ago. So, congratulations, first of all. And
Thank you.
also, you studied burnout. So, during your PhD, as we mentioned in the beginning, but why did you choose this topic? Because this is really not a usual topic that we research in PhD. This is something that I haven't seen before.
I chose this topic for a variety of reasons. And I think one of the most important reasons for me is something that I've seen over and over again in education. It's something that I've seen repeatedly in our teachers, in our principals, people that I know that have left the profession. And for myself personally, when I was getting evaluated for my Alberta certification from the government, my evaluator told me, he said, "You are a prime candidate for burnout," after he looked at all the things that I was doing. And as he mentioned that, I started to notice it more and more. And I thought this is a great way to find more data and research on what our teachers and principals are actually experiencing.
Wonderful. And in some ways, do you see after you research even more in how can I say people that are with burnout and don't know about it, people that you work with?
100%. And I think that's something that really opened my eyes as I met with more people, as I've talked to different leaders and teachers through some of the work I do at Andrews University. I'm able to recognize some of the symptoms and signs. And when I talk to them, they start to recognize it as well. They notice their exhaustion, they notice how they're depersonalizing from things. And I think that when we start to recognize it, it becomes just more upfront in your mind about what people might be experiencing and how many people are actually experiencing this. So the more I researched it, the more I saw it, and the more I saw it, the more I wanted to address it in different ways.
Wonderful. And just to clear up, we're in the beginning of this podcast. So maybe someone is like, I know that people say stressed out, really. Like, I'm stressed out. I'm struggling with stress. And sometimes it's because of small things like your car broke or you had to move from your house. But stress is something, burnout is something really larger than just a momentum.
Mhm.
Explain for us what you could say to people to understand what really is burnout?
Course. And that's a great way of describing it because stress is momentary. Stress is something all of us experience, and every profession has it. Burnout is something that builds and is building for a long time. It's a combination, a culmination of a lot of different things happening. And it's not something that a weekend off is going to fix, or for teachers, a spring break or a summer off. It's a constant. And I think that educator burnout, and I say this with principals and teachers in mind because I want to include both sides of that. It's a psychological syndrome and it's a response to these interpersonal stressors. So it is partially stress, but it's excessive demands on strength, energy, the resources that individuals have with them. And it's not isolated to education, but it is heightened because emotional, cognitive, and relational demands of the profession. And it's funny because research actually shows that education parallels with other high stress occupations. So you think of things like law enforcement individuals, healthcare workers, they're always in a stressful situation. Teachers' stress levels are actually mirroring those. And that speaks volumes about what they're experiencing on a day to day basis. And it's all day, all throughout the year, and it kind of never ends for them.
Wow. And you studied with Adventist teachers, right? What did you discover? Like in Canada, was your research? Explain a little bit of what you researched and where you researched.
Of course. And I think you mentioned it. There's not a lot of research, or if there is research on educator burnout, it's primarily focused on public school systems. I want to focus on the unique culture that Adventist education has. And because I work in the Canadian Seventh day Adventist system, I want to make sure to focus my research on those individuals in our system, what they experience. And what ends up coming out of that is this idea that they're stretched thin for time, for energy. A lot of anyone that knows or has an Adventist educator as a friend or family member, it's, oh, I have grading to do, I have planning to do. Then you work all day, and then you have coaching, school trips, mission trips, excursions, emails, curriculum, all of these things. It keeps going on and on for them, and they never seem to have a handle on things because it's always these demands, and it's evening and weekend work. So when there's this lack of balance for them, it feels like Adventist education, or education as a whole, is demanding more than what they're capable of giving. And we know that this mission, and it is a mission in Adventist education, something that they care about, but it requires a lot of themselves, and sometimes that can be a bit much, and that's where we start seeing burnout.
Yeah. And what are the syndromes? Like what symptoms, I would say? What can I feel like that I could be maybe experiencing burnout and I don't know?
Course. I mean, that's a great question because burnout, although it is something that's individual, everyone kind of feels a little bit differently. One of the leading researchers, Christina Maslach, she has years of research on burnout. She's focused on three different dimensions specifically that educators and people will feel. And first is emotional exhaustion. You're feeling drained, overextended, empty. And this is not just a temporary, it's been a rough day. This is an ongoing feeling of emotional exhaustion. Secondly, is depersonalization. People start to distance themselves as a defense mechanism. So this is distancing from your colleagues at work, from the students that you work with. You distance yourself from family members sometimes, and you sometimes start feeling cynical about the whole situation. You don't react in the way that you normally would. And then lastly is this sense of what they call reduced personal accomplishment or reduced self-efficacy, where you don't feel effective in your role anymore. You ask yourself, am I making a difference? Is this worth it? And those dimensions actually interact with each other and then build on each other to lead to this sense of burnout. And it gradually becomes overwhelming for the individual.
Wow. Wow. And what can we do to like minimize the chances of having a burnout or to fix if we and we can say it this way burnout?
It's one of those things that in the research that I've done, one of the major components that come up when we talk about burnout specifically is that a lot of the strategies have been focused on the individual. What can you do to prevent burnout for yourself? So that's like, self care. Try to take time for yourself. Go take a hot bath. Go for a walk. And we're very fortunate in our Adventist system that our faith communities provide a lot of support. And that's something that does show up in the research. People lean on their faith community, they lean on their faith individually as well. But I think one of the problems that happens is that you can put all these strategies in place and you can tell someone to take care of themselves and you can have all these PD sessions on please take care of yourself, do this. But if we don't actually build a system around them that allows that to become a reality, then it's just words. And in the interviews that I've had with teachers and principals for this dissertation, many of them know that their conference leaders, the church leaders, are telling them take time, step away, do things for your health. But if the items that are the responsibilities are not being taken off their plate to give them actual time to recover and have a life outside of school, then we see this problem just persisting because it's systematic. And the Christina Maslach says this very, very pointedly, is that burnout is not an individual issue. At the core, it's a management issue. How are people being given the
Mhm.
resources or the time to be able to do it? So it's something that has to go work hand in hand. Teachers have to take and educators have to take things and do it for themselves, to take care of themselves. But then the system also, on the other hand, has to give them the opportunities to take care of themselves.
Yeah, for sure. Because if you need to slow down, how can you slow down if you have too much in your plate, right? It's
Exactly.
not so simple. And well, we know we talked about how the church and leaders and school leaders need to help, but what can we do to support, like practical tips to support someone, our community, our teachers that are experiencing burnout?
I think that's probably the best question because, as you mentioned, it goes with the organizational piece of it. And the most important step, I think, is the recognition as a community, as an organization, and that it's not just a personal issue, but systemic and organizational that we need to address. And it's funny because as the North American division did their year-end meetings in 2022, they had work groups that were designed to identify the teacher shortage across the division. And they linked it to three different things. One was burnout and lack of respect. So one of the first things that they mentioned. Second was compensation, which is always a concern for people, especially in our economy these days. And one of the things that they said specifically in the meetings, and it was quoted in, I believe, the Adventist education website, it says, as a church, we preach work life balance, but our accolades go to the workaholics. We have to own up to our needs to address this issue for our teachers. And I think that is part of what, when you ask, what can we do? First, recognize that there is this problem systemically, that we set up our teachers sometimes and our educators to be burned out. And it's not because we want them to, but because it demands so much of them and recognizing what those demands are. And for our family members, for individuals to see it, it's recognizing some of the signs, as we kind of talked about. If we can recognize what someone's going through, and I can say personally for myself, when I've been burnt out, um, I have a little shorter of a temper, or I get irritated with things a lot quicker. And you may notice that with someone. And for me, it always ends up happening that my dog will be the one that gets the brunt of my frustration. And it's just like he wants to go outside. I'm like, I'm too busy and I don't want to, and it gets like that. So recognizing some of those things, and for our system, trying to find ways to alleviate some of that stress, take things off the plate, take things into the community, because a lot of times we ask, what can our teachers do for our church? What can our teachers do for our students? Then sometimes we need to ask, what can we do for them? What can we do to help take things off their plate? And that's like, hey, maybe that's coaching a sport so the teacher doesn't have to, supervising an event with them so there's more hands making the work lighter. There's a lot of different ways we can hopefully address it, but the big thing is just making the recognition first.
Yeah. Well, you are an online school principal, and have heard a lot about how studying, working online has been really overwhelming for several of us. So, working with your team, what have you changed after your experience of studying about burnout? Have you changed minor changes? I know because sometimes you guys are different. One teacher isn't living not nearby, but what can we do as an example? What have you done that could serve for other realities also? Schools that have teachers that are present going every day to work.
And that's something that I've actually been able to do in two different settings. So I have worked obviously in brick and mortar schools in person, and then in the past 5 years, I've been working online. And the part that really hit home for me was watching teachers burnout, watching that fire that in their eyes go out. And once you see that, they may stay in their profession, but they're not the same. And what we suggest and what we've seen at the end of my study as we did recommendations is a workload audit is the first and foremost. If teachers are experiencing a high levels of emotional exhaustion due to levels of workload, then how do we reduce that for them? So for myself and my school, one of the things we try to do is build in their school day the time that they need to do a lot of their responsibilities, because when teachers finish a school day, then when they go home, it's the grading, it's the planning. So can we build those times in? And something that's actually come up recently in the province of Alberta where I work is our public school teachers have gone on strike. They went on strike for a few weeks because of similar working conditions. And someone put this really great quote out there where they said, if teachers and principals only worked their scheduled hours in the school day, the system would fall apart, because there's so much that they do outside of their workday. And for a lot of our teachers, they don't even take time off when they're sick, because it takes more time to prep a sub list and a sub plan than it is
Yeah,
to
yeah.
actually just go in and teach sick.
Extra plan, right?
Exactly. So part of that, as you're kind of mentioning, is like, what have I done is I've taken a look at the workload audit. How many hours are they teaching versus how much hours do they have for prep? And it's a bit easier for me because there's no lunchtime supervision for my teachers. There's no after school care. There's no sports program because we're online. So there's certain things that they don't have to do outside of work hours. And every other brick and mortar school that's out there, they need someone to do those programs. We offer holistic education for our students. It's one of the beauties of Adventist education, but we need people to run them. To do all of
Yes.
these amazing things, we need someone to do it. And inevitably, it falls on the teacher. So, what we're trying to do is find ways to enlist the community to help us and realize that this whole "it takes a village to raise a child" scenario is
Yes.
that we want people to be involved. Not that they have to do everything, but that the teachers don't either. It's a shared load, hopefully makes it lighter for everyone. So that's probably the main thing that we're looking for, and then just a level of understanding for what they go through every day.
Yeah, yeah. And being Adventist school, have you seen that this is even harder for us to work deal with burnout?
It really is, and I say that from the experience and the conversations that I have with individuals as part of my dissertation or just in general, and it's not because we don't care. Our system
Yeah.
cares so deeply for our students and they care for our educators, but a lot of times we're very handcuffed by the finances of it. It would be nice to have smaller classrooms with more teachers to get more personalized attention and whatever else that might be, but we don't have the money to do it. And that's part of what hopefully we can bring up is that there are opportunities for our teachers and our schools to thrive in these environments. And when we look at what the struggles of the Adventist system is that we don't have the personnel. We
Yeah.
have a teacher has to be a coach, a teacher has to drive the bus. When you're in some of those two-room schoolhouses that are still very prevalent in our system, you're the bus driver, you're the janitor, you're the secretary, you're all of those things along with. And the part that was mentioned several times in my study is the faith community acts almost as a double-edged sword, where on one side, it provides you with support and love, which teachers appreciate. On the other side, sometimes the expectations are, well, it's a mission, so you should just continue to
Yeah.
give because it's missional,
Great.
or yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Or they say things like, well, you're a teacher, you should be able to teach Sabbath school, or we need someone to do Pathfinders. But because you're already working, so it's just adding something else to the list, and nothing is ever taken off. And teachers will do it because there's so much love in their heart. But
Yeah.
eventually that burns them out.
Yeah. You know, I'm passionate about this topic because a few years ago, I experienced burnout. And one of the best advices that I received was really funny advice, but really simple. And was someone that said, "You're spending too much time working for the Lord and forgetting the Lord that you work for." And I was like, really? That's amazing because that sums up everything. It was not that I didn't have a devotion. I
Mhm.
didn't praying. I was studying my Bible. I was doing everything in my church, but in my mind, I was doing the most important thing that was working for, and it's not that. That's not the point, right?
I love that's exactly. I'm glad you brought that up because it reminded me that's something that when you ask, what do I tell my staff? I tell them that same thing. We can't get so caught up in working for God that we forget to work on our own personal relationship with Him. And
Yeah,
we read about it all the time. The most important first mission field for educators is their family. For workers for the Lord is their family. And I know for a
yeah,
lot of our teachers, our principals, myself, I keep justifying the amount of hours I spend because I'm working for the Lord. I'm working for God. I'm shepherding his students, his children, whatever it might be. But then at the end of the day, after I've worked 12, 14 hours or wherever it might be, I crash and I don't have time for my wife or my son or my own personal relationship with Jesus. And we can't get so caught up with working for God that we lose track of those things. And in my dissertation, I spent a lot of time reading, um, for us as a church, when we talk about what our system is built on, it's the Bible first and foremost, but Ellen White's writings are very strong in there as well. And she cautions for workers in the church about working too much and losing. what their passion for what they do, because we can get so caught up in it that we forget ourselves, we forget our family. And I tell my staff, I'd rather have you for 30, 40 years of working in this profession at this level than for 5 years working at this level. And we
Yeah.
have to find that balance. And I kind of mention this to our students in a lot of, or to our teachers in a lot of ways where, you know, from a car analogy, as a car, your car can go 160, 170 kilometers an hour if you need it to, but it shouldn't go like that for a long time. It should have a constant speed that we kind of go. And we've been kind of pushing that meter of how fast and how much we're asking. And you can do it for a week or a weekend or a year, but eventually your car is going to break down, and our people will. And if we don't take time, our bodies will force us to take time. And
Yeah, because
that
we are
is
not
what we see
prepared
more.
for that, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, that's amazing because when you hear a story of burnout, normally it doesn't finish well. That's what makes everyone um, afraid of having a burnout, right? And Dave, you research a lot. I'm sure you talked with different ages. Now we have young adults, we have older people that have been working for several years in Adventist education. Have you seen a difference between different ages?
Most definitely. And there, in the research that I've done, the difference doesn't come up necessarily in the level of burnout, but I think generationally, we're starting to see a shift with the new generation that's coming in comparatively to what has been in the past. And if I talk to a lot of teachers or principals that worked, 20, 30, 40 years ago, they say, well, that was just life. You just take all of this time and you do all of these things. That was just what the job was. And the new generation says, well, no, I want to have time for myself. I don't want to burn out. And I think that we're starting to see this, I'm not going to say conflict between the two groups, but it is a different mentality in what the expectations are. And when a teacher nowadays is asked to do something extracurricular outside of what their job description is, some of them are saying, no, I don't have the time for that. I want to be able to, have a life outside of this place. And that's going to take some time to really adjust because our Adventist education system survives on the non-working hours. And I
Yeah.
mean that with a lot of love and respect because I love the system. I still work in the system, but it requires a lot of outside of your work hours to make it function the way it has. And the only way we can ever fix that is having more teachers, more educators in the system. But again, that comes with complications in and of itself.
Yeah. Yeah. You were talking about struggling. You were a person that could have burnout. And I'm sure everyone that's listening has someone that, or maybe yourself, have
Mhm.
been struggling with burnout or know someone that has been struggling with burnout. We have talked about the system and how we have a lot of things that we could think of to make it easier for our educators. But talking on the individual, you think that saying no sometimes is important because sometimes we think that we just need to say everything, take on everything and say yes and do our best on everything, but we are managing too much and maybe we should say no more often.
100%. It's the hardest part because what a lot of individuals mention, and myself included, is there's a guilt in saying no. And whether
Yeah,
that's organizational or personal, we feel like when we're saying no to coaching something, to doing something extra, to spending more time in something, that you're hurting the students and that this is going to impact them or hurting your organization, depending if you're working outside of education. But as you mentioned, I, as someone that's been studying burnout for a while, I have to be constantly reminded by my wife, by my coworkers, that it would be really ironic for myself to be doing a dissertation on burnout and then burn out myself. And
yeah,
I've recognized that because I feel like I've been at that point for a while in different ways. And one of the things that I know for my own personal well-being and health is I don't have my work email on my phone, so I don't get notifications outside of working hours. If there's emergencies, my teachers can email or can text me and we can talk, and I'm happy to do that. But I have to be able to set boundaries for myself. And as a school leader, I try to do the same thing for my staff, where I tell them, give yourself working hours. You are not available. And this is something that's probably heightened more now than it was 50, 60 years ago. When you left the school building in, early 2000s even, you were not contacted because there's no way to contact you unless they had your
Yeah.
personal number. Nowadays, you're constantly connected, and sometimes that expectation is that you should always respond. But I think we have to be able to create that separation, because if we don't, then we're constantly carrying around the burdens of the day into our weekend, into church, into our family life. So being able to say no and having an understanding in your mind that it's okay to not be everything to everyone all the time.
Yeah. We need to allow ourselves to rest, right?
Exactly.
Not
Be
just
gracious.
Yeah. I heard someone mentioning a few years ago, it was a doctor, and I was with someone in this appointment, and he mentioned, what do you do in your free time? And the person
Mhm.
said, "Oh, I like to go online and check my phone." And the person said, "What is the chance that you will answer an email?" So that's the point that you mentioned. That's really interesting. Our personal and our professional lives are attached to each other in our cell phone, right? So it's we need to be conscious, eh, and really want to avoid work
Mhm.
and do
You
this
have to.
like, yeah, in a
Absolutely
purpose,
have
right?
to. Because if it's
Yeah.
not taken purposefully, if it's something that we just allow to kind of penetrate into those areas, it will. It will always something important is always happening that you want to check and be sure of, but it's trusting in that you will have time, you will take time to do it later, and that you need to spend that time for yourself. Because when we talk about those visits to the doctor, that same question comes up: what do you do for yourself? Because they'll always ask that. What do you do for yourself? And
Yeah.
when I talked to teachers and when I had interviews with teachers that had experienced burnout, they said when you get to a certain level of it, that when you get time off, the only thing you do is you rest. You lay down, you disassociate, because your passions are not your passions anymore. You don't have energy for that. And I take this back to when I first started in education. Um, my my students would always ask me, Mr. Elias, why are you single? Why aren't you dating? Why aren't you? And I said, I spend all my time with you guys. I don't have the time to find and to have meaningful things outside of work. And that was really a shocker for them, because they didn't understand the time commitment that I made. That if I'm always with them, how am I going to have other fulfilling relationships in my life?
Yes, yes. And you now studied with, this is something to mention, with a small kid, and also
Yes.
married, and a school principal. So you had a lot, for sure, these last days. So I can imagine how you have been struggling again with managing your time and all of the things that you had to do during the day, right?
It was a big thing. I told my wife I'm trying my best to, now that it's done, to take a more of a step away, but I would change and prioritize my time differently. I would do my work day. I work at Andrews as an adjunct professor as well during part of the day. And then I'd have my time with my family. And then from 8:30 when my son goes to bed until midnight, I would work on my dissertation. And if I did that for much longer, it would definitely been burnout.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine. Well, Dave, it was wonderful talking with you. Now, Dr. Elias, and
Yes.
I know you will have your dissertation already available. So we're going to share the link in the
Mhm.
comments, and I'm sure people want to know a little bit more. So if you can just sum up what you mentioned specifically in the thesis, that can they can find extra besides what we talked here, because we're talking 30 minutes, but you wrote way more than that, right?
It is the hardest thing, is telling people that I'm going to summarize everything I've studied. And ultimately, what I studied and what came out of it is Our Adventist educators, teachers, and principals are feeling high levels of emotional exhaustion. And a lot of times they are not reaching the level of depersonalization. I think that part of that is because of our faith, where they feel a connection to our students. They still feel like they're accomplishing something, but they are tired. And a couple of teachers had quoted in my dissertation study where they say, I want to be the best teacher I can be, but if I'm not getting the support and if the system isn't designed to let me thrive, then it's impossible. And one thing that I kind of lean on at the end is teachers and principals. They believe so strongly in this mission. And that's one thing that kept coming out, that they're tired, burnt out, exhausted, wanting to leave, but they won't because they feel that this is a life calling. But they are worried that Adventist education may not survive if we don't take care of the people working on the front lines.
Yeah, that's really important. Congratulations on researching that and bringing that to attention because that is a really important topic. Congratulations. Now, Dr. Elias, and thank you for sharing this with us in this episode. I'm sure everyone here will be really blessed, and we need to take care of ourselves. And this
Mhm.
was alert for us, right?
Thank you so much for having me again. Again, as I mentioned, doing this Adventist education podcast is a huge blessing, and I really hope that it can reach as many people as possible.
And thank you to all our listeners for tuning into Rooted in Faith. Remember, taking care of yourself is not selfish, it's part of your ministry. A rested, inspired teacher reflects the love of Christ more fully. Until next time, stay rooted in faith and encouraged in your calling.